In a very historic milestone this week, the NATO allies committed to dramatically increase their defense spending to that 5% of GDP, something that no one really thought possible. And they said, "You did it, sir. You did it." Well, I don't know if I did it, but I think I did.
There's Donald Trump trying to take at least some of the credit for what we heard from NATO this morning. Of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney in the Netherlands for a 2-day NATO summit. And the big news is all 32 member countries have now committed to a major hike in defense spending from 2% to 5% of GDP by 2035. For Canada, that could mean up to $150 billion a year. Let's talk to Roger Hilton about this. He's a former Montrealer working as a non-resident fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute in Vienna. Roger, welcome back to the show.
Great to have you back. What's going on?
Listen, I'm in awe over the big announcement this morning. You just heard Donald Trump along with our listeners from the break. I'm going to start off with that, actually. How much of the credit, I don't know, whatever the path may be, but how much credit does Donald Trump get to take for this massive increase in NATO spending, defense spending?
I mean, to get respect, you have to give respect. It's impossible to suggest otherwise, that whether it was through coercion, fear of not honoring Article 5, or just pure bullying. I mean, Donald Trump, in an unprecedented and very unconventional way, has, got the allies to spend this high amount. So, I mean, credit has to be given to him. But one thing just to correct on you is we'll still to be determined on Spain. I just finished watching Trump's presser, and he just lashed out at the government in Madrid. And maybe we'll touch on that. But last time it was Canada. But I mean, this is exactly what the PM and his team wanted to avoid, was sort of being singled out in the press conference, and Trump using the language of being ripped off and how unfair it was, and him taking punitive measures against the Spanish government in Madrid.
Okay, so listen, in the last hour, I had mentioned this because I was surprised, because I'd heard this week, Spain basically kicking and screaming over this, saying no way, no how on the 5%. So, I mean, it certainly seems, I'm looking at press releases, and the press releases certainly show this united front here. Are you saying it's not as united?
I mean, I think I think Secretary Rutte has done just a marvelous job managing, from a stage point, everything with the summit. And when it comes to the Spanish situation specifically, I mean, if you look closely into the language, I think what the Spanish have agreed on is that they will meet the capability targets. And again, I haven't seen the exact language about sort of the opt-out, but I mean, they came right up until the last second saying, like, this is unreasonable. We can't afford this. We're going to have to slash from other programs. And this is a government that is under a huge amount of sort of public displeasure at the moment. There's a corruption scandal going on. So as I said, I mean, it doesn't matter what's written. I mean, Trump thinks of all of the allies, only the Spanish are not meeting it. And that's the thing that that counts the most.
Okay, so this leads us nicely to what I wanted to talk about here, because, if the Spanish are being open about how difficult it would be to meet these targets financially, right, and spending and cutting programs, that kind of thing. Why wouldn't that be the case in Canada? This is what I'm scratching my head with. The coffers are already, right? The budget is already in a rough shape in this country. So how is Canada going to be able to meet those targets?
Well, I mean, I think two things, like when it comes to the financing over the last couple of days at the NATO Public Forum, I mean, the defense ministers and the ministers of foreign affairs from all of these countries, they acknowledge that while this is an imperative policy decision, the way in which they get it is going to be very difficult, right? Whether it's on raising taxes, cutting other programs, and it's up to each capital to sort of determine how they want to do it. The opposition in Canada have asked for the budget on how Canada will finance the extra, cash that they got in to get to the 2 billion. But at this moment, I think the difference that distinguishes Spain and Canada is very much a geographical one. The main threats facing Spain are from irregular migration, maybe hybrid attacks, where they don't, as they said very openly, Prime Minister Sanchez, that they don't feel the heat from Russia. And it's the exact opposite, where I think, Canada and Carney's team really acknowledged, the threat of the Arctic, the, again, very undiplomatic language coming from Washington. So I think the threat perceptions across the alliance are very different. But again, it was said so often during the public forum that geography is not a reason that the burden should not be shared equally.
Mm.
So just because Spain geographically is far from the eastern flank, that does not mean that they get an opt out on spending, the 3.5% on capabilities.
We're with Roger Hilton from the Canadian Global Affairs Institute in Vienna. We're talking about the massive increase in spending announced by NATO member countries. So, Roger, what's the message being sent this morning? Whether it's on mutual defense for NATO countries, whether it's on, what the president of the U.S. has been pushing everyone on, what do you think is the overall message being sent this morning?
I think one thing that really stood out was from the Czech president again, who said that, battles are fought on the battlefield and not with numbers. So the takeaway for me is you have this communique that come out, you said the numbers are coming, but the what everybody is really stressing is scaling this up on the industrial side and getting the capabilities actually in hand. You had the Prime Minister of Denmark and the Danish security services often saying that Russia is aggressively reconstituting and could, pose a real threat to NATO within 5 or 6 years. So, I mean, the hard work of getting the communique and agreeing on the spending target was one challenge, but the next challenge really comes with, the relationship between government, the private sector, and between allies. Economies of scale of actually scaling these things up and getting them in the hands in a short time. It's not just Russia, right? These capabilities are things that we need domestically, for our allies in Asia. You had 45 countries participating at the NATO summit with only 32 members. So my takeaway was, yes, we've agreed on it, but now it's time to put, these words into action and see the physical products as soon as possible.
Roger, I've heard from listeners this morning, and some are sharing concerns, worries that the only reason the NATO countries are doing this is because they think that something really bad is coming, and NATO countries need to be prepared for whatever it is that's really bad that's coming. Do you see it in that sort of same way?
I mean, I think, the fear right now, at least, I mean, you look out in the international landscape and it just seems as if there's a cascade or an avalanche of situations happening. I mean, you have this very fragile ceasefire happening between Iran and Israel, but I think there is legitimate reasons to worry, that something bad is on the horizon, and that it's better, to invest more right now and to be ready for it than not at all. One interesting point, which again was talked about it during the 2 days, was this massive increase of 3.5% only really materialized because so many countries for so long neglected to spend the
Hmm.
2%. So if the
Aha.
countries had actually just followed this after the whale summit, where they had agreed on the 2% after the annexation of Crimea, there wouldn't be this massive, political challenge facing everybody about where we're going to get the money. How is industry going to cope with these demands, buying things off the shelf. So this is
Hmm.
an example where, keeping a constant state of readiness capabilities long term is much more cost effective than what's happening now, where they're having to surge in money, and buy things off the shelf and not necessarily developed in, domestic industry, which is something that a lot of the countries stressed about. We're just going to be buying products from Korea or from the United States, and how does
Hmm.
that help our economy? So there's obviously parts in, the technological side that they're trying to stress as well. But as I said, I mean, it's better to have these capabilities than not have them at all.
Roger, I got to be quick here, but I want to wrap up talking about where does the United States stand now? How does NATO view their friend, ally, frenemy? How do they view the United States right now?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I mean, I came away from Trump's presser somewhat optimistic
Hmm.
about it. In his own way, he said it, he spoke very emotionally about hearing all of the ally countries stand up and talk about how the leaders love their country and how it was very beautiful. And his words verbatim was, the US is here to help protect those countries. So, I mean, as you said, this is very much a transactional thing. I don't think Trump thinks, so much that the United States is getting ripped off.
Hmm.
But one thing that the message was they testing was that there will be eventually some sort of American disengagement or withdrawal. And I think they're gradually trying to sort of test that message on the Europeans, and they want this withdrawal to be organized and coordinated. So,
Hmm.
I mean, as I said, their priorities are very much in the Asia Pacific. But look, NATO, we still need America for Article 5, right? As they've said, not a single country in Europe can do, even collectively, what the United States offers, as you just saw sort of with the bombing in
Yeah.
Iran or whatnot. So, as I said, stay on their good side, and work together on industry.
Roger, we'll leave it there. Always insightful. Thanks so much this morning.
Thanks a lot, and elbows up, Cabinet Montreal.
Take care, Roger. That's Roger Hilton from the Canadian Global Affairs Institute in Vienna.